Hello and welcome to Chess Please. Today I wanted to talk about the concept of swindling in chess. So swindling is where you can gain a win or a draw from an otherwise lost position, and oftentimes comes about after you've made a couple of blunders or given away a piece or so. It sounds like you'll need a bit of luck or misplay from your opponent to achieve a swindle, and very often you will, but there are some systematic tips, tricks, and general guiding principles that can help you raise the odds of you pulling off a swindle. Now, personally, there is some strange rush and a wonderful feeling of playing like an absolute cabbage for most of the game and somehow coming away with at least a draw. So here are some tips and tricks to help you do the same. Now, when trying to pull off a swindle, I think it's important to keep two things in mind to help keep you motivated. The first one being is, unless you are a titled player or very, very highly rated, the likelihood is in every single one of your games, you and your opponent are going to make several mistakes, if not several blunders. So just because you've given away a piece, that is not the end of the story by any means, and the likelihood of your opponent making a mistake only gets greater if you can complicate the position. So keeping that in mind, that they are far from perfect, they're just as likely to make a similar mistake as you. The second thing that I would keep in mind is, once you have made that blunder or given away a piece, treat that game like a free hit. You know, if things play out the way they probably should, you'll lose that game. But it's lost anyway. If you resign, you definitely lose. But if you cling on in there, complicate the position, as we'll see, you do just give yourself the chance of some free elo points. So why leave that on the table? And you can have a bit of fun trying to get a swindle as well. I always like to be a mischievous, annoying thorn in the side of somebody who's up material against me. I like to just complicate things, and it's crazy how often it works. And that's not me being like, oh, it's crazy how often I pull off these great escapes. It's crazy how often you just keep making things annoying and putting on pressure that your opponent will at least reciprocate with a blunder, and you're back to a normal game. So those are two guiding principles: knowing that your opponent is just as likely to make a mistake as you, and treating the game as a free hit. Now, moving on to more specific tactics that you can use as well. The first thing that I would do, once I've blundered or made some terrible move and I've lost material and I'm down a piece and this game is looking like getting away from me, the first thing to do, launch an attack. You do not have a lot of time left. If you give your opponent time to consolidate, get their king safe, set up some defenses, and just sort of start motoring up the board and taking space, their material advantage is going to become more and more of a competitive advantage. But if you can start hitting the gas straight away, get all of your pieces, all of your remaining pieces, because you've given one away, all of your remaining pieces into the attack, pointed square at the king, a checkmating attack, a kingside attack if they're castled, but involving each and every one of your pieces can help to temporarily hide that material imbalance. Like if you're down a full rook, for example, but your opponent's rook is still stuck on its home square behind a wall of pawns and doesn't have any open files to go for, then in practice you have as much material to launch an attack. Now again, that's why I mean, don't give them time to bring that rook out, to get that rook on an open file. Hit the gas straight away, launch an attack at your opponent's kingside or wherever their king is, with all of your remaining pieces. So hit the gas is my first step. Second general sort of guiding principle, don't accept trades. Pretty much for that exact reason, unless the trade benefits you massively, like an exchange where you can start to recoup some of the lost material, or an exchange or like a trade whereby like you're closing the net on a mating attack. Generally, trading is better for the opponent that has more material because, again, as each piece comes off the board, the value of each remaining piece goes up. So if they have more of those, that gap in material grows in practice as well. So don't accept trades. Keep your pieces on the board. Keep your pieces away from just like letting them take with a knight and you'll take back, and more space on the board allows them to use their pieces more. So don't accept trades is my second piece of advice. And my third piece of advice, and we'll move to our example game, is failing all else, look for stalemates and perpetual checks. So, very often overlooked, not always easy to avoid. Perpetual checks, if you're not familiar, is generally if you have a queen or a rook or some combination of pieces that are never going to close the net on a mating attack, but can just always find a new square to harry the king, and can't be blocked in perpetuity. There's always a square that they can go to. Very often happens with a queen and a king in kind of open water, but very few pieces around. Happens more often than you think. You might see the computer will find a few where you might be way down on material, but the analysis is like, oh no, this was a draw. Oftentimes the reason that is because your opponent left the door open for a perpetual check. What I'll cover off here in this sample game is not a perpetual check, but a stalemate. So this is a really long game. I won't go into too much detail. Basically, I was playing against the French defense, which I hate playing against. Video to come soon on some weapon that you can use. A Gambit will have a look at against the French defense. However, at this point, wasn't too familiar with it, and I just hate playing against the French. I get myself tied up all in knots, and eventually we give away a ton of material here. So our first folly is actually going for this sacrifice where we have our bishop and we take the h-pawn there. This wasn't so much the blunder, this is just kind of under the guise of sacrifices are cool, so it's very tempting to make one, but it wasn't ill-advised. It wasn't like a crazy blunder or anything like that, but it wasn't as good. It wasn't the mating attack I might have thought it would be with the bishop. Yeah, bishop moving there. Bishop moving in here, knight moving in there, rook lift, everything like that. So the bishop giving away actually isn't the crazy blunder I'm talking about here. Basically at this stage, so this was not a good move. They had actually bishop in here, would have immediately won an exchange. They missed that, thankfully. But very short order after that, I just give them a full rook here, because I actually meant to move the rook here. It was kind of a mouse slip. Now, moving the rook there is also not a good move, but this is definitely, it's certainly worse to have the rook here and just gobbled up by the bishop there. So, at this stage, we're down 4 points of material, but we do have some things in our favour. Their king is exposed. We do have each of our pieces, developed at least, or not on their home squares. I'm going to zoom through this because there's about 40 moves where I actually don't follow a lot of the principles, where, say for example here, I kind of just trade off a knight with the idea of, I thought again I might have had some kind of perpetuals here, or some, not perpetuals, but a bit of hassle with the queen. None of it was right. I didn't play a good game, c'est la vie, but essentially we'll move on in here. I made some pretty bogus moves, but eventually, after a lot of misgivings and trades, we end up in this position. Now, again, as a swindler's paradise here, black should win this game 99 times out of 100, which is why I love being a swindler, because that 1 out of 100 times makes you feel on top of the world. Now, we do have an asset here. We have 2 connected passed pawns. We have a king that's ready to jump in and support. This rook can get in behind them, but the king for the moment is doing a pretty good job defending. So, as a, rather than the topics we talked about earlier, at this point I'm kind of already thinking, like, how can we either get one of these queen or pawns promoted in exchange for this rook, or alternatively seize up all of my pawns so that I'll be in a pretty stalemateable position. So we just start to push these up the board, and thankfully these connected pass pawns can often start to rumble away on their own, especially with the support of a king, which is exactly what they do. We get them in striking distance of promoting, but at the moment there isn't really a danger of them promoting, because if they do, the rook just takes, king is protecting the rook, it's all over. So we're kind of just playing for time here, but again, we're not resigning, which again, like, etiquette wise, I'll leave that up to the boffins. But we're just playing for time here. We just sort of shuffle our king back and forth. Like, again, if we end up repeating, we end up repeating. But here, my whole mentality here was just don't let them get a passed pawn straight away. Make it as hard for them as possible. Like, lock up this pawn if we can. So at the moment, we only have like 1 or 2 possible moves. And again, we're just sort of shuffling for time. At this stage, a passed pawn was inevitable. So I figured, let them promote. but also just cause a bit of hassle, cause a bit of just complication, a bit of brain annoyance, to use the technical term, a bit of brain annoyance by promoting for the like promoting here is never going to win the day, but it's just another thing to think of. Like if they blunder, like I see they're low on time, like you know, you never know what's going to happen, and you'll find out that something happens. So we're in real dire straits here. They've got a queen and a rook. We've got 2 pawns here. But notice how there isn't a lot of space for us to operate. This guy's a dead soldier. This guy's not going anywhere. So, by promoting here, again, it's always nice to have a queen, but it's destined to die. And I think crucially here, I noticed that these 2 pawns can't go anywhere. So my opponent takes, and that's a draw. I can't go anywhere. Can't go here or here or here. These pawns can't move. So just by murkying the waters, like all of this was refutable. There was things my opponent could have done at each stage here to not end up in this position. But make them make those calls. Make them make the right call time and time and time again. And a lot of the time, like a crazy amount of the time, I can't tell you how often it will pay off. You know, cognitive load will kick in, decision fatigue will kick in, and they'll make a slip up like this, and you'll end up not losing some of those rating points and having an absolute blast in the meantime. So, a very quick crash course on swindling. If you're, you know, if you prefer to just resign after blundering a piece, I would highly recommend just getting into the mindset of being this sort of trickster, being somebody who is a thorn in the side. It's a nice fun role to play, and again, it works an alarmingly high amount of the time. So that's all from me. I hope you enjoyed this sort of kind of more vloggy style chess content. But we'll be back with more openings, traps, and gameplay in the short term. All the best, and thanks for sticking around. If you did have a good time, feel free to subscribe and stick around. Comment down below some of your best swindles, and enjoy whatever day you're facing this video at. All the best. Ta-ra.